so it's a kind of multi-country presentation. But be that as it may, let's start. As I said, my presentation was meant to set a tone, and I left a number of kind of specific things that one could share, because I would leave that to the other colleagues of mine. Some of you are very far. It's not hot out here, or it's not cold, so you can come forward if you're comfortable. But if you can hear me, and you can, I'm just saying this for when we interact, that not many of you are far. But I will start by just sharing that the world has become a global village. Sorry, I missed that spelling there. The world has become a global village, and the fact that modern transportation, modern ways of doing business have made it possible to live in a world as if it's a village, like a local village, and that wasn't important. Of course, with modern communication technologies, it's even far more. But there are trends in the context of traditional medicine that are important to say what's happening globally. First, South Africa is part of the African Union, which has for the past 2 decades declared traditional medicine, 2 decades of traditional medicine, and it meant for member countries to begin to put policies and programs in their countries that would promote traditional medicine. This past week, we were celebrating August 31, which is the African Traditional Medicine Day, and we celebrated across the continent, and that is important. The second is that a few weeks ago, the World Health Organization hosted a global summit on traditional medicine in India, alongside the G20 summit that was going to be taking place in that country, and which was equally very significant to say at a global level. In August, as we recognize Traditional Medicine Month, but there are also movements at a global level to give space for dialogue on traditional medicine. And the theme for that was really recognizing the contribution of traditional medicine within the health and welfare of citizens of the WHO community. And lastly, the South Africa was hosting the BRICS Summit. I know the headlines were always about, is President Putin going to be coming or not coming? But there was other work that was happening in between those noises. And one of those was that as a country, we had to put our position paper in terms of where do we see South Africa in this BRICS partnership. Amongst those things within health was traditional medicine. Of course, that input brought in experts, traditional healers, and of course the officials of government, health, science and technology, environmental affairs, and the range, such that we can put a position of South Africa within the BRICS family. That document then gets embedded within what the Department of Health, the DGs would pull together. So all the DGs of BRICS met and discussed this and distilled the document to then say what should the ministers of health discuss as a submission in terms of when the heads of state meet amongst the discussions they need to hold. So traditional medicine was integral to that discussion. And I do know when they were rounding off, the Prime Minister of India made it very, very clear in his own remarks about the role of traditional medicine, that it should contribute to the BRICS countries, and very strongly so. And I know President Ramaphosa, as the chair of BRICS, supported that very strongly in terms of where South Africa stand on it. I have not seen the final resolutions in terms of how BRICS works, but next day it will be Russia chairing, so some of this implementation will roll out, and probably they will be reflecting on them when they meet again in Russia. Suffice to say that traditional medicine, in a sense, is a debate at a global level amongst several countries, so to say. But Africa itself, we know now we are African, a free trade area, and there are other implications for that. In terms of trade, in this case, there's a discussion around health, but there's also trade that goes with it. I know within the region, the African, the ARSO, the African Regulatory Standards Authority, are convening a special task force that is focusing on standards for traditional medicinal products across the continent, such that these can be standardized, and of course ways to then allow for trade, because once you have general standards across the continent, it makes it easier for industry to understand what it needs to conform to. It also makes it easy for regulators to approve those things. And so that's the other race that we are part of. And also within that is the fact that the African Medical Regulatory Affairs Authority, which now regulates the medicinal products, where SAPRA in South Africa falls under South African Health Products Regulatory Authority. Probably yesterday you would have had the CEO of SAPRA. They are hosting a working group, SAPRA, to look at how African traditional medicines will be regulated in South Africa, because we do not have yet regulations for traditional medicines in South Africa, which we are not very happy about. Once you create the free trade zone, yet the host country in South Africa does not have regulations for these products, we face a risk when they put regulations that we might end up other countries coming forward with their products, because Nigeria has their regulations, Ghana has their own regulations. If you create an umbrella regulatory organization, it may not place us in a good state in terms of trade with our own products where there's lack of regulations. So clearly it would not look fair to you are having a South African product, but you want to go and register it first in Nigeria before you bring it back to South Africa. It looks anomalous in a sense, but these are some of the challenges around this issue. As we deal with this, we have our own pandemics that we're dealing with as Africa. HIV being one of them. We've just recovered from COVID, and diabetes. It's a problem. Amongst those, the diabetes is more like it's a silent killer, and hypertension. And these are, of course, twins. They're partners in crime, you might call them. HIV and TB are partners, and the non-communicable diseases led by diabetes, hypertension, mental health are challenges that we need to find solutions to. There are pharmaceutical products that are there, but we still see that we're not yet there. There's linked, of course, with issues of lifestyle that is changing. But what did COVID teach us? One of the things that we've learned is that we're still operating with a kind of a neo-colonial space, in terms of trade. So our economies are structured, have not changed in structure, that we take our raw materials, send them to the West, they process them and sell them back to us. So our own capacity to manufacture and innovate on our raw materials is still limited in the sense. And so until there's that drastic mindset change, we are in trouble. And of course, if you rely on the West for vaccines, for drugs, to deal with your own pandemics, when the chips are down, the West closes its doors. They will serve its citizens first. And that's been the problem that's been experienced throughout the continent. And also we've learned with COVID that solutions don't lie only on big pharma. Actually, we still don't have a cure for COVID as we speak today. So we can wait for big pharma. We don't, whilst we have our own solutions. And so we have to look at potential solutions from our own. In a sense, the slogan, Vukuzenzele, learn to rely on yourself, rely on your own. And traditional medicine is part of the vehicles that we can use. The second thing is the fact that our institutions that train health professionals, the curriculum does not really emphasize drug development. It's as if I say this not in a very derogatory manner. I say it very respectfully. It's almost like we're training technicians for Pfizer and all these other big pharma. So they'll come to you, breathe in, diagnose, breathe in 5 minutes, and then they write a script. So go to a pharmacist, this drug will sort you. And that's part of a challenge that we have. And so there is a limited growth of this industry in South Africa. And I guess it's the same issue for the rest of the continent as we deal with. But we do have expertise in certain areas. A lot of these pharmaceutical companies conduct clinical trials here in South Africa. So they wouldn't do so if there was no expertise to that effect. Of course, it's different when we go to other countries. But we do have strengths on basic science, on conducting clinical trials. We know with COVID, I think we showed that our science is very strong. We do have a manufacturing base, but we also have our biodiversity. We are the third most biodiverse country in the world, and indigenous knowledge of that biodiversity, which might place us in a good stead. But our theme is about collaboration. We do know that across the continent there are a growing community of traditional healers and scientists that do recognize the need for rigorous science to underpin any claims that are made in favor of traditional medicines. But no group has monopoly over the expertise to take these things forward. And so we do need multidisciplinary teams, and some expertise may not be in a single country, and therefore there is a need to do that. And of course, the technologies that go with it. And I think COVID showed us that if we don't share our expertise with other countries in Africa, it's not helpful, because we all need to move together in solving our challenges. But if you're going to do clinical trials, any clinical evaluations, they also have their own complexities. It's not as straightforward as you take any patient on the road and give them something and bingo, you can. So it also has its own issues that you need to deal with, depending, of course, what is the treatment that you want to study, and what you want to achieve with it. Now, I started by saying we're a village at the moment, And so some of these products may come from another country like China, and they want to enter our market. Our population demography is probably very different to that of the Chinese, so some work will need to be done in this country that will satisfy the regulator to that effect. And of course, new patient populations. If you want to target the North, the Europeans, you might need, although you've done work in China, but you still need to do, so there are those complexities that accompany that you need to also bear in mind. And so around that is the sense that we do need to build our capacity to conduct clinical research. It does need resources. Clinical trials are not cheap. We can do all laboratory test tube work, but we then need to translate that to clinical outcomes. And so that is quite necessary. Like I'm saying, in South Africa, SAPRA does not have a regulatory regime for our African traditional medicines, and so it does still require capacitation to do so. And such networks then become an option to say, if there's something we can do in South Africa, we can collaborate with counterparts in Uganda, we can partner with colleagues in China in the context of the BRICS, or US and Europe, where you're going. It's important. It starts with the people. Sometimes we think it starts with the money. It starts with the people, that they need to be skilled to be able to conduct clinical trials, clinical research at the highest level, and it's possible to do so. With the traditional healers who own this indigenous knowledge, who understand it and appreciate it, it's important that they are part of the team. It also required the necessary infrastructure for that work to be done. The infrastructure for clinical trials, because they are highly regulated, the filing, the storage of things, and how you keep your medicines and all of those things, they are all inspected to keep your trials going. And there are committees that safeguard the clinical trial. They can tell you to stop, and there's monitoring, safety monitoring committee that you must put together. There are ethics committees that have to be involved, and some of them are not used to traditional medicine. In my case, in my medical school, the first trial that we submitted to do, they said, no, we can see all the ethical issues here, but we don't know the product. We are not sure of the product because it's not a pharmaceutical product. So they referred us to it was then the MCC. And it took us, with the MCC, we had a 5-year grant. It took us 3.5 years for the MCC to approve the study. And what they approved had actually changed at that time a number of elements to it, and so that's one of the challenges we face. Of course, if we were to deal with these complexities like SARS-CoV, it's a very complex disease. Even now we still don't understand. There's something called now long COVID. We have not yet understood it to deal with it effectively. But we think traditional medicine can make a contribution. But as I said, it's not a cheap disease to study. In my case, we're working with the live virus. You need a BSL-3 cabinet to work. We work like a spaceman in the laboratory. Those labs are not cheap to maintain and run. Your technologies must be at a certain level to generate quality data that you have, and all the range of things that go with it. To have data that has meaningful clinical implications. The work is happening, but at the same time, you can't do it all alone. It's not possible. You need clinicians, you need healers who have the products, you need, it's a suite. And as more methodologies become available, they may not start here, it might be generated in the US. You need to have partnerships that you can access those technologies to generate more data. We know with the HIV that, yes, the treatment is there, but it does not lead to a complete cure. There's still a chasm, if you want to call it, in terms of therapy. If you stop treatment, the virus will rebound and come back. So we know that. We know that there's still issues of multi-drug resistance, which we always pray we don't get it. There are still access issues to ARTs. We know with COVID, when we had a complete lockdown, some people could not access their treatment. And issues like that, but also the sense of our healthcare systems that has inequity within it. It's expensive. I don't know if you know the budget for antiretroviral therapy in South Africa is quite expensive. And so we do need to look at other alternatives that can come in, but it's not science you can do in a short way to get there. And so it therefore becomes necessary that if we are to translate the research we do to products in the market, we do need to work in an integrated manner, in a collaborative manner that also contributes to interprofessional education. Because once you speak traditional medicine, some people have never heard about it. They may be curious to participate, so it helps. But overall, it can also contribute to our economies because where we do deal with traditional medicine, we're not dealing with harvesting in the wild, but we need to also promote cultivation, good agricultural practices and harvesting practices, which also contribute to job creation in the farming space and, of course, the value chain, so to say. I thought I was going to be opening this discussion to have other panelists to contribute, but it looks like it's going to be me and you as it is. As such, there are things I excluded to talk about because I thought the other people will then contribute. But you can comment, contribute, or ask me questions. It's your seminar. Thank you. There are 2 mics here. Maybe. Eh? How is this part? Oh. They can stay on the campus. Oh, okay. They say you can stay and talk. Oh. Anyway, we're in the ICC, Technology can still do these things. So please feel free, colleagues, to make observations and comments. Oh, there's a hand out there. Oh, those. Yeah. 3.5 years, yeah. Okay, yeah. This was a collaboration with colleagues in the University of Western Cape and us, and Missouri in the US, we were planning to do a trial on HIV for Sutherlandia. So, as I said, when we submitted to our ethics committee at the Nelson Mandela School of Medicine, they could not make a final decision because the product they didn't understand. So we were referred to the MCC, and the MCC, I think we had about every 6 months, we get a list of questions, we respond, we send them back. 6 months later, you get another set of questions. What had happened in that space, we had designed the study on the policy of CD4, entry criteria as CD4 below 200 at the time, but then the policy had changed to CD4 below 350. And whilst a decision had not been made. So in the end, MCC gave us approval to recruit people with CD4 550 and above. That's what we're allowed to do. Now remember, you had already designed your study, you powered your sample size based at the time on CD4 below 200. And so it became a study that we could only focus on efficacy, on safety, not on efficacy, because we're not powered enough at that stage. Because people who have CD4 above 550, it's a range. So you need to show small, significant impacts. You need maybe a sample size of 3,000 to 5,000 when we're not powered at that level. So we did go ahead and do the study because we had asked for money, we couldn't take it back. But we knew at that stage that it will not really have a bearing much on efficacy, but it was good because we could do a double randomized, clinical trial. We could show that we can do that. We could show that with a team of traditional healers and the medical team and nursing team that we had, we could work together to achieve the study. So we published it, but it's not a study you could celebrate any major findings in a sense, yeah. But it was science anyway. Yeah. That is the objective. We did the study at the time at Edendale Hospital, and then once Edendale became prioritized at the time for the NHI as a district, Umgungundlovu became a priority district for NHI, some of the things had to close in a sense because all clinicians and everyone was pulling their energy in that direction. And so we could not then set up a new site for that work. And it takes a while to train people for these things. They have got to meet the good clinical practice. They do those courses and things. If we lose those people, it's difficult to regather and continue. But we have other trials now that are in the pipeline. Within the Durban area and the partnerships that are existing now for clinical trials. So we are confident that going forward, we will be able to do more. Yeah. Thanks. Thank you, I appreciate it. There's another hand, this side.
focus to fungal infections. So as we know, many fungal infections are opportunistic, especially when you have HIV, etc., and even COVID. So do you foresee in the future a shift in the focus to using traditional medicines to mitigate or control fungal infections? Thank you.
No, it's not by design, really. We have a healer who approaches us with a claim, and therefore we pursue that, essentially. But in the context of antimicrobial resistance and things that are now emerging, it's possibilities that we can focus, even on non-communicable diseases, for that matter. Diabetes, hypertension are still going to plague us, so to say. But I think I guess the point of this theme for this session, which I think the organizers had in mind, with COVID in Africa, just to show you, I think in South Africa we probably had the highest numbers of people infected with the virus. But in the parts of the continent, numbers were low. So if you wanted to do a clinical trial in Uganda, for example, it would be difficult to recruit enough sample size to do so. So the observation through WHO became now to say, hey, if you are locked in your country and you can't, but you can recruit in Zimbabwe and elsewhere in South Africa, such that you can power your study by doing a multi-center, multi-country studies to generate enough power. Because for some of these studies, you can't recruit 200 people if you want to make meaningful conclusions. You can't recruit 50 people. It's a proof of concept, that one. But if you really want to do a clinical trial that is going to be groundbreaking, you need far bigger numbers. And so that's the sense here, that as countries, we need to work together, collaborate to kind of resolve some of these things. But to do so, it also need to get the funders and the regulators to the party. Yeah. And one of the things is wound management. That's another big problem. Wounds are big. And that traditional medicines contribute to, which is important. Oh, sorry.
Yes, good afternoon, Prof. and colleagues. Thank you so much for your presentation. So when we talk about traditional medicine, conversations about sustainability and conserving our environment come up. So in terms of that, what are the challenges that we would say that one can perhaps get when they are trying to commercialize their products from this indigenous traditional medicine? Thank you.
Land.
And the tips and whatever advices you actually have to overcome that.
Land, sis. Land is the very first thing. We don't have land as blacks in this country. So that's the first challenge, because if you want to commercialize, you can't go, bundu bashing, harvest things in the wild. It's not good for environment. We had proposed for this province that if we had 22,000 hectares of land that can be dedicated to cultivation of these plants. We have research institutions, because this is not growing as cabbage now and spinach. These are indigenous plants that grow in the wild. If you want to cultivate them, you also need to ensure that in terms of equivalence, they perform in the same way as in the wild. And that land is in with municipalities. That land is in the under the Inkosi, so to say. But it's a kind of a new thinking, because we know these medicines. You get packed up in a Rep Sunday Times. It's packed up in a Smirnoff or Coca-Cola bottle, what. So people don't think when you talk this language, you are serious. It's like you're joking. So the vision for such takes a while to promote, to encourage, to happen. And secondly is that you sit with, we funded last year by science and technology, for example, but to convince rural development and land affairs, agriculture, they're thinking about cabbages and spinaches. They don't necessarily see the linkages that medicine is food and food is medicine and things like that. So it's a challenge that one has to do. So you work therefore with the small plots that you can get, 20 hectares here, 5 hectares there. But really, if you want to grow, if you go to China and India, who are commercializing big time, let me just say, for this province, which has been growing sugar cane, you go through vast kilometers of sugar cane. It's like what we want to replace. We want to replace sugar cane with such plants where they grow anyway in an indigenous way to our environment. Then that's what we plan to do. Because if you're going to sell these things, export to US, FTA, and the rigor is higher. More than just you need a GMP facility to manufacture and meet those, but also the cultivation has to be part of the raw product, must meet certain minimum standards that you meet. So we will get there. We will get there. It's just that it's changing mindsets of people to see what you are talking about. Not just wait, because at the moment everyone is waiting for Pfizer to come and sell them something and someone's solve, not thinking that some of these things can come from us to solve our problems ourselves. Without joking, but being serious science. Yeah. Thanks. You want to follow up? Yeah. Go for it, yeah. Sorry, I may not be seeing other hands. Okay, noted.
Yes, I'm just thinking to myself, what is it that we can do, whether as in the science community or any endorsements that we may get to get the rural affairs and all the other departments that you mentioned on board? Because, I mean, at the end of the day, if we can develop something that can assist us to avoid other pandemics from emerging, then why not? How do we do that? Or how can we do that or contribute on that? Thank you. That's my last question.
That's a good policy recommendation you've just made. Hopefully, I don't know when the Buy Africa conference concludes. These are the things we need to take forward if we want to be prepared for future. Let's include our indigenous knowledge, but it must be done at the level of rigor in science and resources. When you say resources, I'm talking land, for example, that could be made available for such work to happen. Yeah, and it creates jobs as we do that. Thanks. It's gone dead. Let's try if we can, maybe we can hear you. Oh, okay.
Thank you very much, Prof, for your presentation. My question is maybe based on your experience working with African traditional medicines and thinking about the complexity of the medicines normally, and also reflecting on other medicines, such as maybe TCM, traditional Chinese medicine, and how it has progressed to where it is now. I just want to maybe prick your brain, maybe we think about it, if it is actually fair for African traditional medicines to be subjected to the same regulatory or scrutinization process as single drug entities, which is, we know you can already, when you're doing your drug development, you are targeting a specific site. And just looking at that and then using that very kind of system to evaluate African traditional medicines. And we know that these have been used, they come already boasting a long history of use. And now we have to go back as if we are doing drug discovery and doing all those processes. I mean, is it a progressive way of developing African traditional medicines? Or is it also something that is going to hinder us producing what we are needing? Because it is about commercialization and making it more available to other people. But then when we start looking and treating them, so we are going back to the classical drug discovery route of like 10, 15 years, 20 years market.
Okay, thanks for the very, very important question, that. Look, we must understand the market here. Our communities who still are happy to go to a Ninyanga and get their prescription and do that, which is fine. But the demography of society changes. And so there are people who want to access that from Discam, for example. They may not want to go to a herbalist. I mean, let me just give you a scenario. My son, there's in primary school now, I think every second teacher is an expert on ADHD. Every child has ADHD, and they force you to go to doctors to get a prescription. And so we were refusing to have to take these tablets. So the pediatrician decided to prescribe an Indian herb, Ayurveda, but it's prescribed by a specialist, and we go to Discam to get a script for this product. And so you ask yourself, what do we take for that specialist to prescribe that, which is helpful? And we do have our herbalists. Yeah, I mean, Emlaz Ubabcele, he's late now, was a specialist on children. But you don't want him to die with all that knowledge. That can still benefit his family. But unlike that small section of population that he has access to for that treatment, there's a wider number of children with ADHD whose herbs can help. But that would take evidence to do that and give confidence to many other pediatricians to prescribe that. And that is a question of, it's not a classical drug discovery because you're not starting from screening 500 compounds to look for one. You're starting from an indigenous knowledge of what works. But unfortunately, it has not been packaged in a language, in a sense that you can now take that to the US. But if people want to go from healer to healer, that is still a space that is there. If you want to go to your healer and get a prescription, that's a jurisdiction, that is a patient-doctor space. But if you want to have your product to be accessed worldwide or within SADC on what, there are certain criteria that you must understand to operate in. It's a choice. There is no one compelled. We don't compel any healer to come to us with their products. They come to us out of the trust, out of the relationship that we have developed to work on this. Yes, it requires funding, it requires commitment, and it requires to find people who are committed to the cause in the work that we do. It's not easy, but I believe personally it takes one or two breakthroughs that people begin to respect what you do. And that's what we want to do. We will get a breakthrough. We have things that we're working on that we're confident are going to change the landscape and to generate respect for the work that we do. Because we have herbs, we have people who know how they work, but we have not necessarily demonstrated that we can show that they're effective in what they do. Okay, thanks. Follow up?
Just one last question.
Yeah, cool.
And so yesterday, one of the sessions was on genetic diversity in clinical trials. So I'm just curious, when you do have a clinical trial on African traditional medicines, we can expect that your gene pool is, well, 100% or mostly of African descent. So if you have positive results and you want to take your product or your medicines to an European or Western market, how do you convince them that this will still be applicable to them, even if they are not included in the genetic pool of the clinical trials?
Thanks. Yeah, very good question. I think we must close this session now because it becomes difficult. But let me say this briefly. Our first objective is to find cures for our population, for our people first. If then you want to open and enter other markets, clearly you have to do clinical trials there. Now Europe is not complex because we have Europeans here in South Africa. So you can do a clinical trial here, not costing you euros, but in rands, but you define who your entry criteria are for that kind of study. If you want to enter the Chinese market, it's the same things that you may need to do there. But you do that already with a data that is showing from your population. And so it makes that discussion easier to open for that matter. But EU and FDA may have different rules. One of the problems we have here, as I said, is a lack of rules in South Africa. But Ghana they have products that are already in the market in their country, in their hospitals for that matter. So FDA and EU rules are different because for them, if you are working with a plant that they had already previously registered, for example, it's easy to enter. The barrier to entry is easy because they already have a pharmacopoeia on it. They already have some information on it. It may be the formulation and the disease that is different. So the barriers to entry are not as stiff. It's stiff here, I must tell you that. It's tough here in South Africa. Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, if there's any more comments, I thank you for your attention and for your patience. Thank you very much.